Thanks to Johnson Hanson for collating some of the release data for this video. It's not been highlighted much recently, but I think it's quite possible that we're in the middle of one of the densest release schedules for new Nintendo games in the company's entire history. Check this out. We had a big April, Tomodachi Life, the Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition, Nintendo Switch 2 Edition physical drop, and Pokemon Champions. Late May, we started getting a longer set of releases chained together. 21st of May, we got Yoshi and the Mysterious Book. 28th of May, Pictonico on mobile. Then on the 9th of June, we got the shadow drop of Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition's Nintendo Switch 2 Edition. 3 games in less than 3 weeks, but to be fair, only one is a full retail game, with the other 2 being a mobile title and effectively a DLC repackaged as a new game. We now have ahead of us a little while until Star Fox drops on the 25th of June. But then we have, the very next week, Rhythm Heaven Groove on the 2nd of July. 2 weeks after that, Fitness Boxing 3 Nintendo Switch 2 Edition, a title Nintendo are publishing outside Japan. 1 week after that, Splatoon Raiders. The next week, Xenoblade Chronicle 2's Nintendo Switch 2 Edition. 8 games in 10 weeks. 3 Switch 2 exclusives, 1 mobile title, 3 Nintendo Switch 2 editions, and 1 Switch title. And sure, none of these are absolute AAA titles, but Yoshi and Star Fox are at least pretty high-profile properties, while Splatoon, albeit in spin-off form, is definitely worth sitting up for. This prompts 2 questions. What's going on? Secondly, why does it suddenly stop dead after the 30th of July? Because after a summer festival of gaming, we have to wait 7 weeks for Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave, another 5 weeks for Switch Sports Resort, and another 6 weeks after that for Xenoblade Chronicles 3's Nintendo Switch 2 Edition. Granted, there'll be Pokopia DLC in August, and Ocarina of Time somewhere from now to New Year's Eve, but it's still a striking drop-off if you believe that Nintendo's current plan is all there is. Now, of course, what I'm getting at is that it's very likely that there will continue to be a broad range of titles flooding the calendar in the months ahead, many of which will not have been mentioned in the Direct so far. But before we go too deep into speculation, let's consider why the schedule is so dense in the first place, and whether this is usual for Nintendo at the beginning of these kinds of console transitions, or whether something else is going on. And historically, Nintendo has indeed had periods that are relatively busy. Holiday 2019 was quite dense, with Ring Fit Adventure, Luigi's Mansion 3, The Stretchers, Pokemon Sword and Shield, and Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games, all launching in a 5-week period, because of the differential release dates of the original Fitness Boxing between Japan and the West. The Western release schedule in the first couple of months of 2019 was also quite dense, with New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe, Tetris 99, and Demon X Machina, as well as the aforementioned Fitness Boxing in this window. Then, of course, console releases have often had a cavalcade of games alongside. Switch 2 launch day saw not just Mario Kart World, but also Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour and the Nintendo Switch 2 editions of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. What we don't normally see, though, is the sheer density of releases consistently across a calendar. Granted, much of this is due to the kind of presence of so many Nintendo Switch 2 editions. In 2025, there was pretty much a Nintendo Switch 2 edition for every exclusive Switch 2 game, and that is kind of a pace that has largely been maintained. Also, while Nintendo publishes titles, it doesn't seem to be all that bothered about giving them any particular oxygen next to their first-party rollouts. I often point out Octopath Traveler, which was a major feather in the system's cap in the January 2017 launch event for the original Switch system, and which released day on date with Captain Toad Treasure Tracker's port of all things. If we go back to 2017 and 2018, though, we actually do see 3DS titles liberally interspersed into the schedule, even quite close to Switch games, and while there have been far fewer Switch games this year, and they are of course backwards compatible, I think they still consider the Switch 1 to be akin to the 3DS as it was during the early days of the Switch. It's also not completely without precedent to have a number of titles during the second year of a new console. 2018 may be remembered as a fairly slow year for the first 9 months at least, until things went really off the hook from October, but it had quite a lot. 7 3DS titles, digital stuff like Pokemon Quest, plus Switch had a lot of ports and remasters and 3 versions of Labo, but it's fair to say that the only major original titles were a slightly undercooked Kirby entry in March that was added to considerably after its release in patches, a slightly undercooked Mario Tennis entry in June, which was added to considerably after its release in patches, and the promise of Fire Emblem and Yoshi games, which wound up getting delayed to 2019. Well, the first year in a bit of Switch 2 has seen a major fully cooked Mario Tennis, same with Yoshi, and soon Fire Emblem, plus Kirby Air Riders makes the set. But they also seem to be doing the 2018 thing of just bombarding the system with smaller projects alongside. And look, this makes sense. If you think about the development arc of games for a new system, the hardware obviously takes some time to get ready, even though Nintendo has a large internal group who will be across the later stage of development and able to take this knowledge and put it into game development as well. For major games, this means either a delay to the start or that they build around existing technology and then just port later. Therefore, for the first couple of years, having a density of titles, even smaller ones, helps out, and while there are a lot of games arriving, because they're all on different tracks, Switch games, Nintendo Switch 2 Edition, Switch 2 titles, and mobile, they don't hugely overlap and clash with each other. I don't necessarily think it will always remain like this, though. While I think there are dozens of potential Nintendo Switch 2 editions, I could see this continuing to be a source of Nintendo games for a long time to come, but eventually these are likely to slim down, much as Switch ports of Wii U titles started at a very intensive pace with Zelda Breath of the Wild, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, Pokken Tournament Director's Cut, Bayonetta 2, Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition, Captain Toad Treasure Tracker, and New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe in the first 2 years of the Switch system. After that, though, the pace slowed right down, with Pikmin 3 Deluxe, Tokyo Mirage Sessions, and Super Mario 3D Worlds plus Bowser's Fury in the next 2 years, and then just Xenoblade Chronicles X's Definitive Edition in 2025 after that. I think Switch has a deeper bench of games and so could maintain this pace for a while, especially as I think there are very few which wouldn't benefit from at least some small kind of patch. But I expect a similar rate of attrition for the development of these kind of Nintendo Switch 2 editions, with the pace beginning to slow during or after 2027 and to reduce to a very occasional drip from around 2029 or 2030. We also saw a drop-off from 2019 of these smaller digital titles that were often indie collabs or just tiny side projects from the studios, Snipperclips, The Stretchers, Box Boy and others. Good Job in 2020 was probably the last major one of these for some time, as Nintendo realised that they didn't need indies to deliver quick wins and could hang out with the cool kids cranking out major Switch titles. They've never quite returned to this kind of title, and although obviously Dragon Drive and Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour were kind of examples of the genre, they were internal developments rather than working with outside partners. My assumption is that for the first 2 to 3 years of the system, we will continue to see an accelerated pace of Switch 2 releases, but perhaps using a slightly different kind of strategy than the one Nintendo used in 2017. However, this also has to make us think. Nintendo are showing absolutely no signs of wanting to pace this stuff out so far. Notably, Rhythm Heaven and Star Fox back-to-back is a real sign that they don't just see the need to give these niche properties a lot of breathing room, but they seem to be willing to stack them to keep up the momentum. And what might this mean? Well, for one thing, I think it's very unlikely that they're going to grind to a sudden halt. Look, Pocopia can probably hold August, but I've already highlighted that the 6th of August, a Thursday, Nintendo's usual release date, is Metroid's 40th anniversary, and if they wanted some summer headlines in the liminal space between the winding down of the Mario anniversary arc and the ramping up of the Zelda merchandising blitz, then a 6th of August drop of some kind, a Nintendo Switch 2 edition of Metroid Dread, say, would certainly have an impact. We've just seen from Xenoblade that Nintendo are willing to do massive profile-raising blowouts on one particular property, especially if there's a new game in the works, and since they've had so long now on Metroid 6, I still think the odds of some kind of Metroid moment, direct, presentation, trailer, whatever, is a pretty good one, and frankly this summer seems like the optimal time to do it. Another aspect is that Xenoblade Chronicles X showed that physical editions of Nintendo Switch 2 editions could be shipped alongside other games. In that case, Xenoblade Chronicles X's Nintendo Switch 2 edition came alongside Tomodachi Life. Now, I think that's quite clever because it allows Nintendo to reserve spaces for Nintendo Switch 2 editions in its release calendar, but then have different games go out in that slot, which may ameliorate shipping costs, but also is quite a good way of disguising their activities. I've said multiple times that the 1st of October makes sense for me for Ocarina of Time. Personally, I'd shadow drop it in a 1st of September Direct to blow the doors off in terms of hype, but either way, the fact that it's day and date with Xenoblade Chronicles 2's physical release would allow them to continue to plan around shipping without making it too obvious that that's when they plan to launch. And actually, there are worse titles than Xenoblade Chronicles 2 to appear on a shelf next to Ocarina of Time as a potential whim secondary purchase. If they can get even a small fraction of the Zelda crowd onto Xenoblade, well, of course, that's going to be a pretty big thing for Nintendo. Another title on the 7th of December also seems quite plausible, given that Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is launching its Nintendo Switch 2 physical edition in that window. And of course, if there aren't any other games released alongside, that's fine because nobody was expecting them anyway, but it's still a smart way to maintain secrecy around the specifics of release plans. I think there will be other Zelda titles beside Ocarina as well. A Link Between Worlds has long felt the kind of title that would fit here, plus there are smaller titles that could happily be released at short notice. I've mentioned Brain Training as one such possibility in the past. Now, in terms of Nintendo Switch 2 editions, there are still many significant games that could still get something. Princess Peach Showtime and Pikmin 4 remain the likeliest to me, especially now that Good Feel has shipped Yoshi, but I think longer-term safe bets remain Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, Metroid Dread, and Metroid Prime Remastered. Nintendo may give GTA 6 a wider berth and clear out November, but if there's one thing Switch 2 will not be short on, it is first-party games. Maybe not all exclusive games, maybe not all the most massive games, but it will certainly have filled its boots. All things considered, I think although Nintendo are creating a very large number of titles at the moment, I think this will drop off, but hopefully it will do so as the major AAA titles start to come into their own. For now, though, let's just add some forecasts to my current list. I'm going to add 90% forecasts that Pikmin, Metroid, or Fire Emblem receive some kind of free or paid Nintendo Switch 2 upgrade by the end of 2027. Also 90% that there's some kind of Zelda or Mario universe free or paid upgrade by the end of 27, and another digital only or digital first title by the end of this financial year. 70%, I think Pikmin 4's Nintendo Switch 2 edition is coming by the end of 26, and also some kind of Zelda Nintendo Switch 2 edition or free upgrade appears in the Zelda 40th presentation, maybe Hyrule Warriors or just a free glam up for Skyward Sword. 50%, Princess Peach Showtime Nintendo Switch 2 edition, also separately, Famicom Detective Club. I just think that's something where they probably have assets that could be up-res to start with, and so with a bit of minor tweaking and a $5 or $10 bonus, it could be quite a nice profit spinner for them on a relatively niche property. Then 50% Super Mario RPG getting a free Nintendo Switch 2 upgrade by the end of 28, 50% a second game dropping either physically or digitally on any of the Xenoblade Trilogy physical release dates, the 30th of July, the 1st of October, or the 3rd of December. 30%, respectively, Zelda Skyward Sword Nintendo Switch 2 Edition or Advance Wars 1+2 Reboot Camp, Nintendo Switch 2 Editions or free Nintendo Switch 2 upgrades by the end of 2030, and by the end of this financial year, something Metroid Dread Nintendo Switch 2 Edition or separately, as a 30% forecast as well, Metroid Prime Remastered, getting some kind of similar upgrade. At any rate, that is it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and please do consider checking out the Patreon for early ad-free and exclusive content. It really does help out quite a lot, but for now, thank you so much for watching, and I shall see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.